The iron shackles bit into Elena Ward's wrists as the town council dragged her toward the canyon's edge. Behind her, respectable citizens who once called her teacher now spat at her shadow. Ahead, smoke rose from a lone fire where the most feared man in the Arizona Territory waited. They called him Talon Voss, the Apache hunter who took what he wanted and left nothing behind. The mayor's voice cracked as he announced her sentence. Payment for safe passage. Not a trial, not mercy. Just a woman in chains, offered like livestock to a monster. Elena's knees buckled, but the iron held her upright. This was how her life ended. Not with dignity, but with lies. If you're watching from anywhere in the world, drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far this story travels. And if you're already hooked, hit that like button. You won't believe where this goes next. The Arizona sun had no mercy. It beat down on the settlement of Copper Ridge like a hammer on an anvil, turning the dirt streets into dust and the wooden storefronts into tinder. Elena Ward stood in the center of the town square, her hands bound before her, her dark hair plastered to her forehead with sweat and shame. Around her, a semicircle of faces watched with the blank cruelty of people who had already made their peace with betrayal. 6 months ago, these same people had greeted her with warmth. She had been their schoolteacher, the educated woman from St. Louis who came west with books and hope. Children brought her wildflowers. Mothers invited her to Sunday supper. The mayor himself had shaken her hand and called her a civilizing influence. Now they looked at her like she was vermin. "You brought this on yourself," said Mrs. Cartwright, the banker's wife, her voice loud enough to carry. She clutched her shawl despite the heat, as if Elena's presence alone might contaminate her. A woman alone, living in sin, tempting decent men. You should be ashamed. Elena wanted to scream. She wanted to tell them the truth, that there had been no sin, no temptation, no crime, except the one committed against her. But her throat was too dry, and her voice had been taken from her weeks ago, the night Clayton Frost decided she had rejected him one too many times. Clayton Frost. The name tasted like ash. He was the youngest son of August Frost, who owned half the mining operations in the region and most of the land besides. Clayton had charm, money, and the kind of smile that made people overlook the cruelty in his eyes. He had courted Elena with flowers and honeyed words, and when she politely declined his advances, he had laughed it off. But when she refused him a second time, publicly, in front of his friends at the trading post, his smile had turned to ice. 2 weeks later, a lockbox went missing from the assay office. Inside had been nearly $300 in gold dust and a ledger of claims. The next morning, the town marshal found the lockbox hidden beneath the floorboards of Elena's rented room, along with a man's pocket watch and a bottle of whiskey. Elena had never stolen anything in her life. She barely drank water, let alone whiskey, but the evidence was there, plain as day, and Clayton Frost swore before the town council that he had seen her sneaking near the assay office after dark. He had even produced a witness, a drifter who worked in the stables, a man with a gambling debt that Clayton had conveniently paid off the week before. The trial lasted less than an hour. They didn't hang her. That would have required a real judge, a circuit rider who wouldn't arrive for months. Instead, the council declared her guilty of theft and moral corruption, stripped her of her teaching post, and seized what little money she had to repay the community. She was given 24 hours to leave town, but 24 hours became 12, and 12 became none. Because that same night, riders came galloping into Copper Ridge with news that changed everything. Talon Voss had been seen in the hills. The Apache hunter, the half-breed tracker who served no government and answered to no flag. Some said he was a scout who had gone rogue. Others said he was a warrior cast out by his own people. What everyone agreed on was this. Talon Voss was death on 2 legs, and if he wanted something, he took it. 3 settlements had already paid him tribute to avoid raids: cattle, horses, weapons. Copper Ridge had nothing left to give. The mines were struggling, the herds were thin, panic spread through the town like wildfire, and by dawn, the council had gathered in secret. Elena learned of their decision when the marshal came to her door. "They're offering you to him," he said, unable to meet her eyes. "As tribute." She had laughed. It was such an absurd statement that for a moment she thought he was joking, but the marshal's face remained stone. "You can't be serious." "It was a vote," he said quietly. 5-2. I'm a human being. You're a criminal, he corrected, though his voice lacked conviction. And the council believes this is the best way to ensure the safety of Copper Ridge. You mean the best way to get rid of me? He said nothing. He didn't have to. Now standing in the square with iron on her wrists, Elena understood the full scope of their cowardice. They hadn't just condemned her, they had turned her into a sacrifice to protect themselves. She scanned the crowd, searching for one face, one voice that might speak up. But even the women who had once shared her table now looked away. "Bring her forward," the mayor commanded. Two men gripped her arms and hauled her toward the edge of town, where the desert began, and the road disappeared into red stone canyons. A horse stood waiting, saddled and skittish. Beyond it, smoke curled into the sky from a fire built in the shadow of a rock spire, and beside the fire stood a man, Talon Voss. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with long black hair tied back and skin the color of desert clay. He wore a mix of buckskin and woven cloth, a rifle slung across his back, a knife at his belt. His face was hard, carved by wind and sun, and something deeper, something that looked like old grief. But it was his eyes that stopped her. Dark, unreadable, and fixed on her with an intensity that made her breath catch. He didn't move, didn't speak, just watched as they dragged her closer. The mayor cleared his throat and stepped forward, trying to project authority he clearly didn't feel. "Mr. Voss, we bring you an offering, in exchange for safe passage through your territory." Talon's gaze shifted to the mayor. "An offering?" "Yes, a woman. She's young, healthy, capable of what?" Talon's voice was low, almost soft, but it cut through the mayor's bluster like a blade. "Cleaning, cooking, warming a bed?" The mayor flushed. "She's a criminal, convicted of theft. You thought you'd get rid of a problem and call it diplomacy." Talon stepped forward, and the men holding Elena instinctively stepped back. He stopped a few feet away, studying her face. "What's your name?" Elena lifted her chin. If she was going to die, she would do it with what little dignity she had left. "Elena Ward." "And did you steal from them, Elena Ward?" The question surprised her. She had expected mockery, or worse, indifference. "No." "Then why are you in chains?" "Because I said no to the wrong man." Talon's eyes narrowed. He turned to the mayor. "Who accused her?" "That's not—" "Who?" The mayor shifted his weight. "Clayton Frost, a respected member of the community. August Frost's son." "Yes." Talon looked back at Elena, and for a moment something almost like understanding flickered across his face. Then he stepped past her and walked straight toward the mayor. The council members stumbled backward, but Talon didn't draw a weapon. He simply stood there, towering over the smaller man, and spoke in a voice that carried to every corner of the square. "You offer me a woman in chains, a woman you've already judged and condemned, a woman who can't defend herself because you've taken her voice, her money, and her freedom." He let the silence stretch. "And you call this tribute? You thought I was a monster who'd take anything you threw at me." Talon's voice dropped to something colder than the desert night. "You thought wrong." He turned and walked back to Elena. Without a word, he pulled a knife from his belt. The crowd gasped. Elena braced herself. But Talon didn't raise the blade toward her. Instead, he knelt, gripped the chain between her wrists, and with one sharp strike, broke the weakest link. The shackles fell away, clattering to the ground. Elena stared at her freed hands, then at the man kneeling before her. "You have a choice," Talon said quietly, so only she could hear. "You can stay here with these people, or you can come with me." "Come with you?" Her voice cracked. "To what?" "To where?" "Away from here." He stood, his eyes steady on hers. "I won't lie to you. The desert is hard. The journey is dangerous. But I will not chain you. I will not sell you. And I will not treat you like property." "Why?" The word came out as barely a whisper. "Why would you help me?" "Because I know what it's like to be thrown away by people who should have protected you." He glanced back at the town, his expression unreadable. "And because they're cowards. I don't take tribute from cowards." Elena's mind raced. Stay here, and she would be dead within a week. If not from starvation, then from Clayton Frost's revenge for humiliating him again. Go with Talon, and she would be stepping into the unknown with a man the entire frontier feared. But the unknown had already given her more respect in 5 minutes than Copper Ridge had in 5 months. She looked at the crowd, at Mrs. Cartwright clutching her shawl, at the marshal staring at his boots, at the mayor red-faced and trembling. Then she looked at Talon Voss. "I'll come with you." He nodded once, as if he had expected nothing less. Then he turned to the mayor. "Tell August Frost his son is a liar and a coward, and tell him if I see him or his men in my territory, I won't be so generous." Without waiting for a response, Talon walked to the horse, swung into the saddle, and extended a hand down to Elena. She took it. His grip was firm, calloused, and steady. He pulled her up behind him in one smooth motion. As the horse turned toward the canyon, Elena glanced back one last time. The people of Copper Ridge stood frozen, watching her leave. Some looked relieved, others looked afraid. A few looked almost regretful, but none of them moved to stop her. And as the desert swallowed them whole, Elena realized that for the first time in months, she could breathe. They rode in silence for hours. The sun climbed higher, turning the sky white with heat, and the landscape shifted from scrub brush to stone towers that rose like cathedral spires. Talon guided the horse with ease, following paths that seemed invisible to Elena's eyes. She clung to his back, her arms wrapped around his waist, feeling the steady rhythm of his breathing. She wanted to ask 1,000 questions. Where were they going? What did he want from her? What kind of man breaks a woman's chains and then rides into the desert without explanation? But exhaustion weighed her down, and fear kept her silent. So she held on and watched the world pass by. Endless red rock, endless blue sky, endless space where no one could find her. Finally, as the sun began its descent, Talon reined the horse to a stop near a cluster of boulders that formed a natural shelter. He dismounted and offered her a hand down. Elena slid from the saddle, her legs shaking from hours of riding. "We'll camp here tonight," Talon said, already unsaddling the horse. "There's a spring just beyond those rocks. You can wash if you want." Elena nodded, too tired to do anything but obey. She stumbled toward the rocks, found the spring, a small pool fed by a thin trickle of water, and knelt beside it. Her reflection stared back at her, hollow-eyed, dirt-streaked, a stranger. She cupped water in her hands and drank, then splashed her face, scrubbing away the dust and sweat and shame. When she returned to camp, Talon had already built a small fire and was roasting something over the flames. He gestured for her to sit. She did, keeping a careful distance. He handed her a piece of cooked meat wrapped in a flatbread. "Rabbit. It's fresh." She took it, her stomach growling. "Thank you." They ate in silence. The fire crackled. The desert cooled. Stars began to prick the darkening sky. Finally, Elena spoke. "Why did you really take me?" Talon glanced at her, firelight flickering across his face. "I told you, I don't take tribute from cowards." "But you could have just refused. You didn't have to bring me with you." "No," he agreed. "I didn't." "So why?" He was quiet for a long moment, staring into the flames. When he finally spoke, his voice was distant, like he was talking to someone else entirely. "I had a sister once. She was young, smart, full of fire. She fell in love with a soldier from the fort. He made promises. She believed him." He paused. When she told him she was carrying his child, he called her a liar, said she was trying to trap him. His commander had her thrown out of the fort. She walked back to our camp alone in the middle of winter. Elena's breath caught. What happened to her? "She didn't make it." Talon's jaw tightened. "I found her 3 days later, frozen in a ravine. The baby with her." The words hung in the air, heavy and sharp. "I'm sorry," Elena whispered. "So am I." He looked at her then, and his eyes were no longer unreadable. They were filled with old pain and quiet fury. "When I saw you in those chains, I saw her. I saw a woman being thrown away because it was convenient, because men with power decided she didn't matter." He shook his head. "I won't be part of that. Not again." Elena felt something crack open in her chest. She had spent so long being treated like a burden, a problem, a thing to be discarded. And here was a man, a stranger, a man the world called savage, treating her like she mattered. "Thank you," she said, and this time the words carried weight. Talon nodded. Get some sleep. We have a long ride tomorrow. Where are we going? North, into the mountains. There's a place where you'll be safe. Safe from what? From men like Clayton Frost. He stood, brushing dust from his pants. And from men like me, if that's what you're worried about. I'm not, Elena said, surprising herself. Worried about you, I mean. He studied her for a moment, then gave a small, almost sad smile. You should be. Everyone else is. He walked to the edge of the firelight and stood watch, his silhouette sharp against the stars. Elena lay down near the fire, pulling her shawl around her shoulders. The ground was hard, the night was cold, but for the first time in months she felt something close to peace. And as she drifted off to sleep, she realized that the man the frontier feared had given her something no one else had in a very long time. A choice and a chance. They traveled for 3 more days, moving deeper into the wilderness. Talon never pushed her beyond her limits, always stopping to let her rest, always ensuring she had water and food. He taught her how to read the land, which plants held moisture, which tracks meant danger, which stars would guide her home if she ever got lost. You're teaching me to survive, Elena said on the 4th morning as they packed up camp. I'm teaching you to be free, Talon corrected. Survival is just the first step. And what's the second? Choosing what kind of person you want to be when no one's watching. Elena thought about that as they rode. In Copper Ridge, she had always been watched, judged, measured, found wanting. Out here, with only Talon in the sky, she could be anyone, do anything. It was terrifying and exhilarating. That afternoon, they crested a ridge and looked down into a valley where a thin stream cut through the rocks. Talon reined the horse to a stop, his body suddenly tense. What is it? Elena asked. Smoke. He pointed to a spot in the distance where a dark column rose into the sky. Too much for a campfire. Could be a homestead. Could be. His voice was grim. Or it could be a raid. Elena's stomach dropped. Apache? Maybe, or settlers, or bandits. Out here, everyone's dangerous. He urged the horse forward. Stay close. They descended into the valley, the smell of smoke growing stronger with every step. As they rounded a bend, the source came into view, a small homestead, its roof engulfed in flames. The barn had already collapsed, fences were smashed, and in the yard, overturned furniture and scattered belongings told the story of violence. Talon dismounted and drew his rifle. Stay on the horse! But before Elena could respond, a sound cut through the roar of the fire, a child's scream. Her head snapped toward the house. There's someone inside! Talon heard it too. He ran toward the flames, and without thinking, Elena slid from the saddle and followed. Elena, no! But she was already moving, driven by an instinct stronger than fear. The door was open, smoke pouring out like a living thing. She pulled her shawl over her mouth and plunged inside. The heat was unbearable. The air was black. But through the smoke, she saw it. A cellar door, partially open, and beneath it the faint outline of small faces. Here! She shouted. Talon appeared beside her, coughing, his eyes streaming. Together, they wrenched the cellar door open. 3 children huddled below, 2 boys and a girl, none older than 10, their faces streaked with soot and terror. Come on! Elena reached down, grabbing the smallest child and hauling him up. Talon pulled the other 2, and together, they stumbled out of the burning house just as part of the roof caved in. They collapsed in the yard, gasping for air. The children clung to Elena, sobbing. She held them, her heart pounding, her hands shaking. Talon knelt beside them, checking each child for injuries. Are you hurt? The oldest boy shook his head. They came at night, men on horses. They took Mama and Papa, told us to hide. How long ago? This morning. Talon's jaw tightened. He stood, scanning the horizon. We need to move. If the raiders come back, they won't find us, Elena said firmly. She looked down at the children. We're going to keep you safe. The girl looked up at her with wide, hopeful eyes. Promise? Elena glanced at Talon. He met her gaze, and in that moment, an unspoken agreement passed between them. I promise, Elena said. And as the homestead burned behind them, the schoolteacher and the hunter led 3 frightened children into the desert, toward an uncertain future and a choice that would change everything. The children's names were Ben, Samuel, and Lucy. Ben was the oldest at 9, a thin boy with serious eyes who kept watching the horizon as if expecting his parents to appear. Samuel was 7, quiet and watchful, his hand never leaving his sister's. Lucy was 5, small for her age, with tangled blonde hair and a grip on Elena's sleeve that hadn't loosened since they'd pulled her from the cellar. They rode through the night, the horse carrying Talon and Ben, while Elena walked alongside with Samuel and Lucy clinging to her skirts. The children were too frightened to cry, too exhausted to speak. Elena kept them moving with soft words and gentle touches, her own fatigue buried beneath a fierce protectiveness she hadn't known she possessed. By dawn, they reached a narrow canyon where water trickled between smooth stones and cottonwood trees provided shade. Talon lifted the children down one by one, his movements careful, almost tender. He'd barely spoken since they'd left the burning homestead, but Elena had watched him checking their back trail every few minutes, his hand never far from his rifle. "We'll rest here," he said, his voice rough from smoke. "A few hours, then we keep moving." Elena nodded and guided the children to the water. They drank like they'd been wandering the desert for days, gulping handful after handful until she gently told them to slow down. She wet her shawl and wiped their faces clean, murmuring reassurances that felt hollow even as she spoke them. Ben pulled away from her touch. "Where are you taking us?" "Somewhere safe," Elena said. "That's not an answer." The boy's voice cracked. "Those men took our parents. They burned our house. We don't even know you." Lucy started to cry. Samuel wrapped his arms around her, his own eyes filling with tears. Talon crouched beside them, bringing himself to eye level with Ben. "You're right. You don't know us. But here's what you do know. Those men are gone. Your house is gone. And if we'd left you there, you'd be dead or worse." He let that sink in. "I can't promise you we'll find your parents. I can't promise you everything will be like it was. But I can promise you this, as long as you're with us, no one will hurt you." "Why should we believe you?" Ben's voice shook with anger and fear. "You're Apache. Maybe you're the one who—" "Ben, stop!" Samuel's voice was sharp. "He saved us. He and Miss Elena both." "We don't know that." "Yes, we do." Samuel's face was pale but determined. "I saw them. The men who came. They weren't Apache. They were white men. They had beards and hats, and they spoke English, and they laughed when Papa tried to fight back." The words hung in the air like smoke. Ben's face crumpled, all his bravado draining away. He sank to the ground, hugging his knees, and finally let himself cry. Lucy and Samuel joined him, their small bodies shaking with sobs that had been held back too long. Elena looked at Talon helplessly. He met her gaze and shook his head slightly, as if to say there were no words that would help. So Elena did the only thing she could. She gathered all 3 children into her arms and held them while they cried, her own tears slipping down her cheeks and disappearing into their hair. Talon stood and walked to the edge of the canyon, keeping watch. Elena could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his hand rested on his knife. He was scanning not just for danger, but for something else. Something that made his jaw tight and his eyes hard. After the children's tears had finally subsided into hiccups and exhausted silence, Elena settled them beneath a cottonwood tree with what little food remained from Talon's saddlebags. Then she joined him at the canyon's edge. "You know who did this," she said quietly. "I have suspicions." "Tell me." Talon was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was flat, controlled. "There's been talk of a gang working the territory. White men who dress like raiders, burn homesteads, steal what they can carry. Sometimes they take captives to sell across the border. Sometimes they just kill." He paused. "They do it in a way that makes people blame the Apache, keeps the settlers afraid, keeps the army looking in the wrong direction. And the real Apache are trying to survive on land that's being stolen piece by piece." His hands clenched. "But when a homestead burns, no one asks questions. They just assume it was us and send more soldiers into the mountains." Elena thought of the fear in Copper Ridge, the way the mere mention of Talon's name had sent the council into a panic. "You're caught between 2 worlds, blamed by both sides." "I stopped trying to choose sides a long time ago." He glanced back at the children. "But those kids don't deserve to be pawns in someone else's war." "What do we do with them?" There's a fort, 3 days north, Fort Prescott. They'll have soldiers, supplies, maybe a doctor. He turned to face her fully. It's the safest place for them. Will they be safe with you there if the soldiers see you? They won't see me. You'll take them in. Elena's stomach dropped. Alone? You'll be safer without me. I'll get you close, make sure you're not followed, then disappear. His expression was unreadable. Once the children are safe, you can stay at the fort or go wherever you want. You'll be free. The word should have brought relief. Instead, it felt like loss. And you? I'll do what I always do, survive. That's not living. No, Talon agreed quietly. But it's what I know. Before Elena could respond, Lucy's voice called out from beneath the tree. Miss Elena, I'm hungry. Elena pushed down the confusion swirling in her chest and returned to the children. She divided the last of the bread and dried meat, making sure each child had equal portions, even though it meant she and Talon would go without. The children ate slowly, their movements mechanical, still numb from shock. After they'd finished, Samuel looked up at Talon with wide eyes. Are you really Apache? My mother was Apache. My father was a trapper from Canada. Talon's voice was matter-of-fact. That makes me something people don't have a word for. What happened to them? Your parents? Samuel, that's rude, Ben muttered. But Talon shook his head. It's a fair question. My mother died when I was young. Fever took her. My father raised me until I was 12, then he went into the mountains for pelts one winter and never came back. After that, I lived with my mother's people for a while. Then I lived alone. He met Samuel's gaze. Sometimes that's easier. Doesn't it get lonely? Lucy asked, her voice small. For the first time, something like pain crossed Talon's face. Yes. The simple honesty of the answer seemed to reach the children in a way comfort couldn't. They understood loss. They understood being alone. And in that moment, Elena saw them beginning to trust. They rested through the worst heat of the day, the children dozing fitfully while Elena kept watch, and Talon scouted the surrounding area. When he returned, his face was grim. There are tracks, 4 riders, maybe 5, headed northeast. The men from the homestead? Most likely. He checked his rifle. They're moving fast, not trying to hide their trail. Because they think no one's following them. Or because they want to be followed. Talon's eyes were dark. Either way, we need to move. If they circle back... A scream shattered the afternoon stillness. Elena's head whipped around. The children were on their feet, Ben pointing toward the canyon entrance where a figure stumbled into view. It was a woman, her dress torn and bloodied, her hair wild. She collapsed to her knees, gasping. Talon had his rifle up in an instant, scanning for threats. Elena ran to the woman, catching her before she fell completely. Please, the woman choked out. Please help. They took my husband. They took our wagon. They said they'd come back for me, but I ran and... Her words dissolved into sobs. You're safe now, Elena said, though her heart was pounding. You're safe. The woman grabbed Elena's arms with desperate strength. You have to warn the fort. They're planning something. I heard them talking. They said Fort Prescott would burn by week's end. They said no one would stop them because everyone would be too busy blaming the Apache. Talon lowered his rifle and approached slowly. How many men? The woman flinched at his voice, her eyes widening as she took in his appearance. Fear flooded her face. He's helping us, Elena said firmly. How many men? 20, maybe more. They had wagons full of weapons. Barrels of something. Powder, I think. They were laughing about how easy it would be. Her voice broke. My husband tried to fight. They shot him. They just shot him and laughed. The canyon seemed to hold its breath. Elena looked at Talon, saw the calculation in his eyes, the way his mind was already moving through possibilities. We have to warn them, she said. If we go to the fort, we lead those children straight into a massacre. If we don't go, everyone at the fort dies. Elena's voice was steady despite the fear coursing through her, including other children, other families. You don't know that. Neither do you. She stood, still supporting the trembling woman. You said you stopped choosing sides, but this isn't about sides. This is about stopping men who burn homes and kill families for profit. I'm one man, Elena. Then we'll be 2. She met his gaze without flinching. Because I'm not leaving those children, and I'm not letting more people die when we could have warned them. Talon stared at her for a long moment. Then, slowly, something shifted in his expression. It wasn't quite a smile, but it was close. You're either very brave or very foolish. Can it be both? This time, he did smile. Brief, fleeting, but real. We'll need to move fast, no stops except to rest the horse. It'll be hard on the children. They're tougher than they look. So are you. He turned to Ben, Samuel, and Lucy, who were watching with wide eyes. We're going to Fort Prescott. It's going to be a hard journey, but when we get there, you'll be safe. Do you understand? All three nodded. Good. Then let's move. They traveled through the afternoon and into the evening, the landscape shifting from canyon walls to rolling hills dotted with juniper and sage. The woman, whose name was Margaret, rode behind Talon while Elena walked with the children. Margaret spoke little, her eyes distant and haunted, occasionally murmuring prayers under her breath. As night fell, they made camp in a dry wash surrounded by boulders. Talon built no fire, too dangerous, so they huddled together for warmth, sharing what little remained of the supplies. The children pressed close to Elena, their small bodies trembling with exhaustion and fear. Tell us a story, Lucy whispered. Mama used to tell stories. Elena's throat tightened. She looked across the darkness to where Talon sat keeping watch, his silhouette barely visible against the stars. What kind of story? A happy one. So Elena told them about a teacher who came to a frontier town full of hope, about students who brought her wildflowers and mothers who shared their tables. She told them about books and learning and the promise of something better. She left out the betrayal, the chains, the trial that was no trial at all. She gave them the story she wished had been true. When she finished, the children were asleep, their breathing slow and even. Margaret had drifted off as well, her head resting against a saddle. Elena carefully extricated herself and moved to where Talon sat. He glanced at her but said nothing, his attention on the darkness beyond their camp. Do you think we'll make it? She asked quietly. To the fort? Yes. In time to make a difference? He paused. I don't know. But we have to try. We have to try, he agreed. They sat in silence for a while, the desert vast and empty around them. Finally, Elena spoke again. That story you told the children about your sister, was it true? Every word? I'm sorry you lost her. So am I. Talon's voice was soft. She was the only person who ever looked at me and saw something worth saving. After she died, I stopped believing I was. You saved me, Elena said. You saved those children, Margaret. That has to count for something. Does it? He turned to look at her, and in the starlight, his face was open in a way she'd never seen before. I've spent years being the monster people expect. It's easier that way. No one gets close. No one gets hurt. And no one gets saved. Is that what you think you are? Saved? Elena considered the question. A week ago, she'd been in chains, condemned and discarded. Now she sat in the desert with a man the world feared, protecting children who weren't hers, riding toward a fort that might be under siege. Everything about her situation was dangerous, uncertain, terrifying. And yet, yes, she said, I think I am. Talon held her gaze for a long moment, something unreadable passing across his face. Then he nodded once and returned his attention to the darkness. Get some sleep. We leave before dawn. Elena lay down beside the children, pulling them close for warmth. But sleep was slow to come. Her mind kept returning to the burning homestead, to Margaret's desperate warning, to the impossible journey ahead, and to the man keeping watch over them all. A man the frontier had named a monster, who had shown her more honor than every so-called civilized person in Copper Ridge combined. They woke before sunrise and were moving by the time the first light touched the horizon. The landscape grew rougher, the hills steeper, the vegetation sparser. Talon pushed them hard, allowing only brief stops for water and rest. The children bore it without complaint, their faces set with determination that broke Elena's heart. By midday, they crested a ridge and saw smoke in the distance. Not the dark column of a burning building, but the scattered cookfires of a settlement. Fort Prescott, Talon said. It sat in a valley, surrounded by wooden walls and watched over by guard towers. Even from a distance, Elena could see activity. Soldiers drilling, supply wagons being unloaded, civilians moving between buildings inside the compound. It looked orderly, safe, normal. It looked like everything they needed to warn. "How do we get their attention without getting shot?" Elena asked. "We don't." Talon dismounted and helped Margaret down, then the children. "You walk in the front gate. Tell them everything Margaret told us. They'll listen to a white woman with children. They won't listen to me." "What if they don't believe me?" "They will. You're a teacher. You speak well, and you have witnesses." He glanced at Margaret and the children. "That carries weight." "And where will you be?" "Close enough to help if you need it, far enough that I don't start a panic." He began removing supplies from the horse, creating packs the children could carry. "Once you're inside, once they know about the attack, you stay there. Don't come looking for me." "Talon?" "Promise me, Elena." His voice was sharp. "Once you're safe, you stay safe. Don't throw that away for—" He stopped himself. "For what?" He didn't answer. Instead, he finished distributing the supplies and stepped back. "The fort is 2 miles down that trail. Follow it straight. Don't leave the path. If anyone challenges you, keep your hands visible and speak clearly. Understand?" Elena nodded, though everything in her wanted to argue, to demand he come with them, to refuse this separation that felt too much like goodbye. But Ben was watching her. Samuel and Lucy were holding hands, waiting for direction. Margaret stood trembling, her eyes on the distant fort like it was salvation itself. "I understand," Elena said. Talon looked at the children. "You did well. All of you. Be proud of that." "Will we see you again?" Lucy asked, her small voice carrying a hope that hurt to hear. "Maybe." Talon crouched to meet her eyes. "But even if you don't, you remember this. You're stronger than you think, braver than you know. Don't let anyone tell you different." Lucy threw her arms around his neck. For a moment, Talon froze, clearly unprepared. Then, slowly, carefully, he returned the embrace. When Lucy pulled back, there were tears on her cheeks. "Thank you for saving us." "Thank you for letting me," Talon said softly. He stood and turned to Elena. They looked at each other across the space of a few feet that felt like miles. There were 1,000 things Elena wanted to say, questions she wanted to ask, feelings she couldn't name churning in her chest. But time was running out, and words felt insufficient. So instead she held out her hand. Talon took it, his grip warm and steady. "Stay alive," Elena said. "You too." Then he released her hand, swung onto the horse, and rode back the way they'd come, disappearing into the hills without looking back. Elena watched until he was gone, then turned to the others. "Let's go." They walked down the trail in a tight group, the children close to Elena's sides, Margaret just behind. As they approached the fort, a shout rang out from the guard tower. "Halt! Identify yourselves." Elena raised her hands, keeping her voice calm and clear. "My name is Elena Ward. I'm traveling with 3 children and a woman who escaped an attack. We have urgent information about a threat to this fort." There was a pause. Then the massive wooden gates began to swing open, and soldiers poured out, rifles raised but not aimed. An officer stepped forward, his uniform crisp despite the dust, his face weathered but not unkind. "I'm Captain Morrison. What kind of threat?" Elena took a breath and told him everything. The burning homestead, the children in the cellar, Margaret's escape and her desperate warning, the gang of raiders planning to attack the fort within days. Morrison's expression grew darker with every word. When Elena finished, he turned to his men. "Double the watch. Get these people inside. And someone find Lieutenant Barnes. We need to verify this story." The soldiers moved with practiced efficiency. Elena and the others were ushered through the gates into the compound, where curious faces watched from doorways and windows. Children peeked around their mothers' skirts. Men paused their work to stare. Elena felt the weight of their attention but kept moving, focused on keeping the children close. They were led to a building that served as the fort's headquarters, a sturdy structure with a covered porch and American flag hanging limp in the still air. Captain Morrison gestured them inside. "My wife will see to the children, and Mrs. He looked at Margaret. "Hayes," she whispered. "Margaret Hayes." "Mrs. Hayes." You'll all be safe here while we sort this out." He fixed Elena with a sharp gaze. "But I need you to understand something, Miss Ward. If this information proves false, if this is some kind of trick, there will be consequences." "It's not a trick," Elena said firmly. "Those raiders are real. The danger is real. And if you don't prepare, people will die." Morrison studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "We'll see. Wait here." He left, and a woman appeared, Mrs. Morrison, kind-faced and efficient. She immediately took charge of the children, offering them water and bread while asking gentle questions about their ordeal. Margaret clung to Lucy, her eyes distant. Elena moved to the window and looked out at the compound. Soldiers were already reinforcing positions, checking weapons, organizing supply lines. The fort was preparing for siege, and somewhere in the hills beyond, Talon Voss waited alone. The man who had saved them all, the man who would never receive credit or thanks, the man the frontier had decided was a monster. Elena's hand pressed against the glass, and she made a silent promise. If they survived what was coming, if the fort stood and the raiders were defeated, she would make sure the truth was known, that the monster was the men who burned homes and laughed while families died, and the hero was the one no one expected. The fort's physician arrived within the hour, a gray-haired man with gentle hands who examined the children and Margaret with quiet efficiency. He pronounced them exhausted but unharmed, prescribed rest and regular meals, and left instructions with Mrs. Morrison that were followed to the letter. The children were given a room with actual beds, clean blankets, and more food than they'd seen in days. Margaret was settled in the infirmary, her hands still shaking every time someone approached too quickly. Elena was given a small quarters near the officers' housing, a space barely large enough for a cot and a washstand, but it had a door that locked and a window that looked out toward the hills. She stood at that window as the sun began to set, searching the ridgeline for any sign of movement, any hint that Talon was still out there watching. The knock on her door made her jump. "Miss Ward?" Captain Morrison's voice was formal, but not unkind. "May I have a word?" Elena opened the door. The captain stood with another officer, younger, with sharp eyes and a notebook in his hands. "This is Lieutenant Barnes," Morrison said. "He's been questioning Mrs. Hayes about the attack. Her story matches yours exactly. We're taking the threat seriously." "Good," Elena said, relief flooding through her. "But we have questions." Morrison gestured to the small room. "May we come in?" Elena stepped aside and both men entered. There was barely space for them all, so they remained standing, the quarters suddenly feeling more like an interrogation room than a sanctuary. Barnes flipped open his notebook. "Mrs. Hayes mentioned a man who helped you reach the fort, a tracker. She said he was the one who found the children, who guided you through hostile territory." He looked up. "She also said he was Apache." Elena's stomach tightened. Half Apache. "His name is Talon Voss." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Morrison's expression hardened. "Talon Voss brought you here? He saved my life. He saved those children. He's the reason we were able to warn you at all." "Talon Voss," Morrison repeated slowly, "is one of the most dangerous men in the territory. He's wanted for questioning in connection with a dozen raids, multiple murders, and God knows what else. And you're telling me you traveled with him willingly?" "I'm telling you the man who saved us was nothing like the monster you're describing," Elena shot back. "Everything I've seen him do has been to protect people, not harm them." Barnes scribbled notes. "Where is he now?" "I don't know." "You don't know, or you won't say." "I don't know," Elena repeated firmly. "He brought us close to the fort and then left. He knew you'd react exactly like this. He knew his presence would cause panic instead of being recognized for what he actually did." Morrison exchanged a glance with Barnes. "Miss Ward, I understand you've been through a traumatic experience. The town of Copper Ridge reported you as a fugitive wanted for theft. Then you appear here with a known outlaw's assistance, warning us of an attack that conveniently can't be verified until it happens." He paused. "You can see how this looks suspicious." The words hit Elena like a physical blow. "You think I'm lying? You think those children are lying? That Margaret Hayes, who watched her husband get murdered, is lying?" "I think," Morrison said carefully, "that the frontier makes strange bedfellows. And I think Talon Voss is capable of using desperate people to serve his own purposes." His purpose was saving 3 children from burning to death. Elena's voice rose despite herself. His purpose was getting us safely to people who could help. What possible benefit would he gain from that? Information about fort defenses, guard rotations, supply levels. Barnes ticked them off like items on a shopping list. Everything a raiding party would need to plan an effective attack. Elena stared at him in disbelief. So in your mind, he saved children and warned you about an attack just so he could, what? Lead that attack himself? Does that make any sense to you? What makes sense, Morrison said, his tone hardening, is that we can't afford to take chances. This fort protects over 200 people, including civilians and children. If there's even a possibility this is a trap, I have to consider it. Then consider this, Elena said, fighting to keep her voice steady. Everything I've told you is true. There are raiders planning to attack this fort. They're armed, organized, and they want people to blame the Apache so the real threat stays hidden. Talon Voss risked his life to make sure you knew that. Whether you believe it or not doesn't change the facts. Morrison studied her for a long moment. Then he turned to Barnes. Double patrols. I want scouts in the hills checking for any sign of movement. And I want armed guards on Miss Ward, the children, and Mrs. Hayes at all times. Armed guards? Elena's eyes widened. You're treating us like prisoners? I'm treating you like unknowns in a dangerous situation, Morrison corrected. Until we can verify your story, you'll remain under supervision, for your own safety as much as ours. He left before Elena could argue further, Barnes following close behind. The door closed with a finality that made Elena's chest tight. She sank onto the cot, her hands shaking with frustration and fear. They didn't believe her. Or rather, they believed her just enough to prepare for an attack, but not enough to see Talon as anything other than a threat. Which meant if he came anywhere near the fort, if he tried to help when the raiders actually struck, the soldiers would shoot him on sight. Elena pressed her palms against her eyes, trying to think. She needed to find a way to reach Talon, to warn him, but she was being watched, and any attempt to leave would only confirm Morrison's suspicions. She was trapped by the very safety she'd sought. A soft knock interrupted her spiraling thoughts. The door opened to reveal Ben, his thin face serious and worried. Miss Elena, can we talk to you? Behind him stood Samuel and Lucy, freshly washed and wearing clean clothes that were too big for their small frames. Elena gestured them inside and they crowded into the tiny space, sitting on the floor when there was no room on the cot. We heard the soldiers talking, Ben said quietly. They think Mr. Voss is bad. They think he's going to attack the fort. They're wrong, Elena said. We know. Lucy's voice was fierce for someone so small. He saved us. He was nice to us. He didn't have to be, but he was. The captain asked us questions, Samuel added, about what happened at our house, about Mr. Voss. We told him the truth, but I don't think he believed us either. Elena pulled Lucy into her lap, her heart aching. These children had lost everything, survived horrors no child should face, and now they were being treated with suspicion because they'd been helped by the wrong person. Listen to me, Elena said, looking at each of them in turn. What we know about Talon Voss is true. No matter what anyone else thinks, he saved our lives. He protected us. He showed us honor when others showed us nothing but cruelty. That doesn't change just because people are afraid. Oh, but what if they hurt him? Lucy whispered. What if he tries to help and they shoot him? Then we make sure everyone knows the truth, Elena said, though she had no idea how she would accomplish that. We make sure his name is cleared. After it's too late? Ben's voice was bitter beyond his years. That's not fair. No, Elena agreed. It's not. They sat together in heavy silence until Mrs. Morrison appeared to collect the children for supper. As they filed out, Ben paused at the door and looked back at Elena. We won't let them call him a monster, the boy said. No matter what happens, we'll tell the truth. After they left, Elena returned to the window. The sun had set, and stars were beginning to emerge in the darkening sky. Somewhere out there, Talon was alone, probably watching the fort, probably knowing that he'd delivered them into safety while condemning himself to permanent exile. She pressed her hand against the glass, wishing she could send him a message, a warning, anything. But all she could do was wait and hope that when the attack came, the truth would be undeniable. The attack came 3 days later, and it came at dawn. Elena woke to the sound of gunfire and shouting. She threw on her dress and rushed to the window just as the alarm bell began clanging frantically. In the growing light, she could see chaos erupting across the compound. Soldiers were running to defensive positions, civilians were being herded toward the central buildings, and beyond the fort's walls, riders were circling, firing rifles and throwing torches. Morrison had prepared well. The gates were reinforced, the guard towers were manned, and return fire was immediate and organized. But the raiders had numbers and surprise on their side. As Elena watched in horror, one of the torches sailed over the wall and landed on the roof of the supply building. Flames caught immediately, spreading with terrifying speed. Someone pounded on her door. "Miss Ward, we're evacuating civilians to the headquarters building. Come now." Elena grabbed her shawl and ran. The compound was a nightmare of smoke and noise. Women clutched children and ran. Men too old or injured to fight stumbled toward safety. Soldiers shouted orders that were barely audible over the gunfire and the roar of spreading flames. She found Mrs. Z. Morrison herding people into the headquarters building, her face pale but determined. "Inside, quickly. Where are the children?" "I don't know." Elena's heart lurched. They were in the officers' quarters. "Those quarters are on fire." Mrs. Morrison pointed to a building engulfed in flames. Everyone was supposed to evacuate, but in the confusion, Elena didn't wait to hear more. She ran toward the burning building, ignoring the shouts behind her. Heat hit her like a wall, but she pushed through, covering her mouth with her shawl. The door was open, smoke pouring out. "Ben! Samuel! Lucy!" Her voice was raw from smoke and fear. A faint cry answered her. She plunged into the building, barely able to see. Furniture loomed out of the smoke like ghosts. The floor was hot beneath her feet. And there, huddled in a corner, she found all three children, too frightened to move. "Come on!" She grabbed Ben's arm, hauling him to his feet. Samuel clutched Lucy, his face streaked with tears and soot. "We have to go now." They stumbled toward the door, but a beam crashed down behind them, cutting off their escape route. Elena spun, searching desperately for another way out. The windows, small, high, but possible. "Ben, help me!" Together they dragged a burning table beneath the window. Elena climbed up, smashed the glass with her elbow, and began pushing the children through. Samuel went first, then Lucy, both of them dropping into the arms of soldiers who had appeared outside. "Your turn!" Ben shouted at Elena. "You first!" The ceiling groaned. Elena shoved Ben toward the window just as part of the roof collapsed. The boy tumbled through, and Elena tried to follow, but her dress caught on something. She yanked frantically, feeling the heat intensifying, the smoke choking her. Then hands reached through the window, strong, familiar hands, and pulled her through with force that left her breathless. She tumbled out of the building and into arms that steadied her, kept her from falling. She looked up into Talon Voss's face. "You're supposed to stay inside," he said, his voice rough with smoke and something that might have been fear. "The children are safe." He set her on her feet but didn't let go. "You need to get to the headquarters building now. Where are you going?" "To end this." He pulled his rifle from his shoulder, checked the ammunition. Around them, the battle raged, but Talon's focus was absolute. "Morrison needs to know the truth. The only way to make him see it is to show him." "Talon, they'll shoot you." "Let them try." He looked at her then, really looked at her, and his expression softened in a way she'd never seen. "Get those children somewhere safe, Elena. When this is over, when the smoke clears, make sure they remember that people are more than what fear makes them." Before she could respond, he was moving, running toward the fight with the deadly grace of a predator. Elena wanted to follow, to stop him, to do something other than watch him disappear into the chaos. But Ben was pulling at her hand and Lucy was crying, and Samuel was pointing toward the headquarters building where Mrs. Morrison was frantically waving them over. Elena gathered the children and ran, her eyes never leaving Talon's form as he vaulted onto the wall and began picking off raiders with precise, lethal efficiency. He moved like he was part of the fort's defense, like he belonged there, and soldiers around him hesitated, unsure whether to shoot the man fighting beside them or trust him. They reached the headquarters building and were pulled inside. The main room was packed with terrified civilians, all pressed against windows trying to see what was happening outside. Elena positioned herself at a window with a clear view of the wall where Talon fought. He was magnificent and terrifying in equal measure. Every shot he took found its mark. Every movement was calculated. When a raider managed to scale the wall, Talon was there before the soldiers could react, his knife flashing in the firelight. He wasn't just defending the fort. He was turning the tide. "Who is that?" a woman breathed beside Elena. "That's Talon Voss," Elena said clearly, loud enough for others to hear. "The man Morrison thinks is the enemy. The man who's currently saving all of our lives." More eyes turned to the window, watching as Talon directed soldiers to weak points in the defense, as he threw himself between a raider's gun and a young soldier who would have died without that intervention. The battle was brutal, close quarters, and desperate, but slowly, inexorably, the raiders began to fall back. Then everything changed. From the hills beyond the fort, a war cry split the air. Elena's blood went cold as she saw them, Apache warriors, at least 30, riding hard toward the fort. The civilians around her screamed. Soldiers on the walls turned their rifles toward this new threat, abandoning the fight with the raiders. But Talon didn't turn his weapon on the approaching warriors. Instead, he stepped to the highest point of the wall, clearly visible, and raised his hand in a gesture Elena didn't understand, but the warriors clearly did. They reined their horses to a halt just outside rifle range. A single rider separated from the group and approached slowly, stopping just beyond the wall. He was older, his face weathered and marked with scars that spoke of a lifetime of battle. He looked up at Talon and spoke in a language Elena didn't know, his voice carrying across the sudden, eerie quiet. Talon responded in the same language, his tone respectful but firm. The exchange was brief, tense. Elena held her breath, aware that everyone in the fort was doing the same. One wrong word, one wrong movement, and the fragile peace would shatter. The warrior looked past Talon to the fort, to the fires still burning, to the raiders now in full retreat. Then he looked back at Talon and spoke again, this time in English. "You stand with them." "I stand against murderers who use your people's name to hide their crimes," Talon called back. "These raiders burn homesteads and blame the Apache. They plan to burn this fort and do the same. I won't let innocent blood be spilled for someone else's profit." "The whites have spilled much innocent blood." "Yes." Talon's voice didn't waver. "On both sides. But these people," he gestured to the fort, "they have children here, families, people who just want to survive, same as you." The warrior was silent for a long moment. Then he raised his hand, and the line of Apache warriors behind him shifted. Elena's heart hammered as she waited to see if they would attack or retreat. "You have chosen your path, Talon Voss," the warrior said finally. "It is not an easy one." "No," Talon agreed, "but it's mine." The warrior nodded once, a gesture of acknowledgement, if not agreement. Then he turned his horse and rode back to his people. As one, the Apache warriors wheeled and disappeared into the hills, leaving the fort standing and the raiders scattered. The silence that followed was deafening. Slowly, Talon lowered his rifle and turned to face the fort's interior. Soldiers stared at him with weapons still raised but fingers off triggers. Captain Morrison emerged from the command post, his face unreadable as he approached the wall where Talon stood. "You stopped an Apache raid," Morrison said, his voice carefully neutral. "I stopped a massacre," Talon corrected, "on both sides. Those warriors could have killed us all. They could have. But they're not the mindless savages you think they are. They respond to reason, to honor." Talon climbed down from the wall, moving slowly so as not to startle the nervous soldiers. The real threat was always the raiders. White men dressed like ghosts, burning homes and blaming people who were just trying to protect what little land they have left. Morrison stepped closer, his eyes searching Talon's face. "You risked your life for people who would hang you on sight. I risked my life for children who didn't deserve to die for other people's hatred." Talon glanced toward the headquarters building where Elena stood watching through the window, and for a woman who saw past fear to the truth. The captain followed his gaze, then looked back at Talon. "The town of Copper Ridge has a warrant for your arrest. They say you kidnapped a schoolteacher. They chained her like an animal and offered her as tribute to save their own skins," Talon said flatly. "I gave her a choice. She chose to live." "Is this true?" Morrison called toward the building. Elena didn't hesitate. She pushed open the door and walked out into the compound, the children following close behind. She crossed the space between the headquarters and the wall, aware of every eye on her, every weapon still held ready. She stopped beside Talon and looked Morrison directly in the eye. Every word he said is true. Copper Ridge condemned me to death because I was convenient. Talon Voss gave me my life back. He saved these children when no one else would. He warned you about the raid when he could have just disappeared into the hills and let you all die. Everything I told you was true, and he's the reason any of us are standing here right now. Ben stepped forward, his young voice clear and strong. Mr. Voss carried my sister out of a burning house. He didn't have to. He could have left us. He taught us to be brave, Samuel added. Lucy, the smallest, looked up at Morrison with eyes that had seen too much suffering. He's not a monster. Monsters don't save people. Morrison looked at the children, at Elena, at Talon standing quiet and still, making no move to defend himself. Around them, soldiers lowered their weapons one by one. Civilians emerged from the headquarters building, drawn by the strange tableau in the center of the compound. You saved this fort, Morrison said finally. You saved these people. By any measure, that makes you a hero. I'm not a hero, Talon said quietly. I'm just a man who's tired of watching innocents die while everyone argues about who's more civilized. Then what do you want? Talon looked at Elena, at the children, at the fort that was still standing because he'd chosen to fight for it instead of against it. I want the raids to stop. Both kinds. I want children to grow up without learning to hate before they learn to read. I want... He stopped, the enormity of it too much to put into words. Peace, Elena finished softly. He wants peace. Morrison was quiet for a long moment, absorbing the weight of everything that had happened. Then, slowly, deliberately, he extended his hand to Talon. Then maybe we can work toward that together. Talon stared at the offered hand like it might be a trap, but Elena could see the moment he decided to take the risk, to believe that maybe, just maybe, something could change. He gripped Morrison's hand and the captain shook it firmly. Around them, something shifted. It wasn't acceptance. Not yet. It wasn't forgiveness for all the blood that had been spilled on both sides. But it was a crack in the wall of fear and hatred, and through that crack, light began to seep in. As the sun rose higher and the fires were finally extinguished, as casualties were counted and the wounded were tended, Elena stood beside Talon and felt something she hadn't felt in longer than she could remember. Hope. The hope lasted exactly 4 hours. Elena was helping Mrs. Morrison tend to the wounded in the makeshift infirmary when Lieutenant Barnes burst through the door, his face flushed with urgency. Captain needs everyone in the command post. Now. Morrison was already there, standing over a map spread across a rough wooden table, his expression grim. Talon stood beside him, and Elena's stomach dropped at the tension in his shoulders. Other officers crowded the small space, their faces ranging from suspicious to openly hostile as they watched Talon's every movement. We captured 3 of the raiders, Morrison said without preamble. They talked, confirmed everything Miss Ward and Mrs. Hayes told us. The gang's been operating for 8 months, burning homesteads, stealing livestock, blaming the Apache to keep the army focused elsewhere. That's good news, Elena said carefully, sensing it wasn't. The good news ends there, Morrison pointed to the map. The raid on the fort was a diversion. While we were fighting them off, the main force, nearly 40 men, rode north to hit a supply convoy. They got away with enough weapons and ammunition to arm a small army, and according to our prisoners, they're planning something bigger. Barnes stepped forward, his notebook open. They're targeting the San Miguel settlement. 200 civilians, minimal defenses. The raiders plan to hit it tomorrow at dawn, take everything of value, and burn it to the ground. Why San Miguel? One of the officers asked. Because it's remote enough that help won't arrive in time, Talon said quietly, and because it has what they really want, the payroll for 3 mining companies. $20,000 in gold scheduled to arrive tomorrow afternoon. Morrison nodded. They'll kill everyone who gets in their way, take the gold, and disappear across the border before anyone can stop them. The room fell silent. Elena felt the weight of it settling over her like a shroud. 200 people, families, children, all about to be slaughtered for gold they didn't even possess yet. We have to warn them, she said. Warn them how? Barnes challenged. San Miguel is 40 miles from here through hostile territory. Even if we sent riders immediately, they'd never make it in time. The raiders have a head start and know every shortcut through those hills. Then we go after the raiders directly, another officer suggested. Cut them off before they reach the settlement. Morrison shook his head. We lost 12 men in today's fight. Another 8 are wounded. If I strip the fort of defenders to chase raiders, we leave everyone here vulnerable to another attack. I can't risk it. So we do nothing? Elena's voice rose despite herself. We just let those people die? We send a messenger to the nearest cavalry unit and pray they can mobilize in time. Morrison's tone made it clear he knew how unlikely that was. It's the best we can do with the resources we have. It's not enough, Talon spoke with quiet finality. Those people will be dead before cavalry arrives. You know it. I know it. Everyone in this room knows it. What are you suggesting? Morrison asked, though his eyes said he already knew. I'm suggesting I go. Talon traced a route on the map with his finger. There's a pass through the mountains here. Narrow, dangerous, but it cuts the distance in half. I can reach San Miguel by tonight, get the people to safety before the raiders arrive. 1 man against 40? Barnes laughed bitterly. That's suicide. 1 man who knows the territory, knows how to move unseen, knows how to turn terrain into a weapon. Talon's voice was calm but unyielding. I've survived worse odds. And if you fail? Then I die trying to save innocent people instead of watching them die from safety. Talon met Morrison's gaze. Isn't that what soldiers are supposed to do? The barb hit home. Morrison's jaw tightened, but he didn't look away. You're not a soldier. No, I'm something better. I'm someone who doesn't need permission to do what's right. The officers erupted in angry protests, but Morrison raised his hand for silence. He studied Talon for a long moment, and Elena could see the calculation in his eyes, the weighing of impossible choices. If I let you go, Morrison said slowly, you'd be acting without authorization. If something goes wrong, if you're captured or killed, the army can't help you. You'd be on your own. I've always been on my own. And if you succeed, if you somehow manage to save 200 people against impossible odds? Morrison's expression was unreadable. What then? Then maybe people will finally understand that the real enemy was never the Apache or the army or the settlers. It was the men who profit from keeping everyone at each other's throats. Talon stepped back from the table. I'm going whether you authorize it or not. The only question is whether you'll help me or try to stop me. Morrison was silent for what felt like an eternity. Then he turned to Barnes. Get him whatever supplies he needs. Food, ammunition, a fresh horse. Sir, you can't be serious. That's an order, Lieutenant. Morrison's voice brooked no argument. He looked at Talon. You have until sunset to prepare. After that, you're not our responsibility. I never was. Talon headed for the door, then paused and glanced back at Elena. Something passed between them, unspoken but profound. Then he was gone, and Elena felt the absence like a physical ache. She followed him outside, catching up as he crossed the compound toward the stables. Talon, wait. He stopped but didn't turn around. You should stay here, Elena. Stay safe. I didn't stay safe when I followed you into that burning house. I didn't stay safe when I warned this fort about the raid. She moved to stand in front of him, forcing him to meet her eyes. I'm not staying safe now. This isn't your fight. Yes, it is. Her voice was fierce. Those people in San Miguel, they're just like the people in Copper Ridge. They don't know the danger coming for them. They don't know that men are planning to destroy their lives for profit. Someone has to warn them. Someone has to stand between them and the people who see them as nothing but obstacles to gold. And you think that someone is you? I think that someone is us. Elena held his gaze. You taught me that choices matter, that who we are is defined by what we do when no one's watching. Well, I'm choosing this. I'm choosing to help you save those people, whether you want me to or not. You could die. I could have died in chains in Copper Ridge. I could have died in that burning homestead. I could have died a dozen times already. She stepped closer. But I didn't. Because you gave me a choice. Now I'm giving you one. Let me help, or waste time arguing while people's lives hang in the balance. Talon stared at her, and for the first time since she'd met him, he looked genuinely uncertain. Why? Why risk everything for strangers? Because I was a stranger once, and you risked everything for me. The simplicity of the answer seemed to shake something loose in him. Because those children in there risked their lives to tell the truth about you when everyone else called you a monster. Because Margaret Hayes, who lost everything, still found the courage to warn people she'd never met. We're all connected, Talon. The moment we decide some lives matter more than others, we become exactly what we're fighting against. He was quiet for so long that Elena thought she'd pushed too hard. Then, slowly, he nodded. You'll need warmer clothes. The mountain pass gets cold at night, and a rifle you can actually shoot. Relief flooded through her. I can shoot. My father taught me. Then let's hope you don't have to prove it. He resumed walking toward the stables. We leave in 2 hours. If you're not ready, I go without you. I'll be ready. Elena turned to head back to the headquarters building and nearly collided with Ben, Samuel, and Lucy. The 3 children stood watching with identical expressions of determination. You're going with him, aren't you? Ben asked. Yes. To save the people in San Miguel? That's the plan. Lucy grabbed Elena's hand. We want to help too. Absolutely not. Elena knelt to the girl's level. This is going to be dangerous, more dangerous than anything we've faced. You 3 need to stay here where it's safe. But you're not staying where it's safe, Samuel pointed out with the irrefutable logic of a child. Why do you get to help and we don't? Because I'm an adult and you're children. We're children who survived raiders burning our house, Ben said. Children who walked through the desert and lived through a battle. We're not helpless. I never said you were helpless. Elena squeezed Lucy's hand. But the best way you can help is by staying here and staying safe. If something happens to us, if we don't come back, you need to be here to tell people what happened, to make sure the truth gets told. The children exchanged glances, some silent communication passing between them. Finally, Ben nodded reluctantly. We'll stay, but you have to promise to come back. I promise to try. That's not the same thing. No, Elena agreed softly. But it's the most honest thing I can tell you. She hugged each of them, memorizing the feel of their small bodies, the trust in their eyes. Then she stood and walked away before her resolve could crumble. Mrs. Morrison helped her prepare, providing sturdy traveling clothes, a warm coat, and a rifle that had belonged to her son before he died in an Apache raid 5 years earlier. The irony wasn't lost on either of them. He would have liked Talon Voss, Mrs. Morrison said quietly as she checked the rifle's mechanism. My son believed that people were more than the worst things done in their name. He tried to build bridges instead of walls. It got him killed. I'm sorry. Don't be. He died believing in something better. That's more than most people can say. She handed Elena the rifle. Come back alive. Show everyone that his dream wasn't foolish. Elena took the weapon, feeling its weight, its promise, and threat in equal measure. I'll do my best. 2 hours later, she and Talon rode out of Fort Prescott as the sun began its descent. Morrison watched them go from the command post, his expression unreadable. The children waved from a window, their small hands pressed against the glass. And as the fort disappeared behind them, Elena felt the world narrow to just this: the horse beneath her, the man beside her, and the impossible mission ahead. They rode hard through the afternoon, pushing the horses to the edge of endurance. The landscape shifted from scrubland to rocky foothills, then to the base of mountains that rose like broken teeth against the sky. Talon led them unerringly through terrain that looked identical in every direction, following paths that existed only in his memory. As darkness fell, they reached the entrance to the pass Talon had mentioned. It was a narrow gap between sheer cliff walls, barely wide enough for a single horse. The path beyond was treacherous, strewn with loose rocks and blind turns. We go through on foot, Talon said, dismounting. Lead the horses. Watch your footing. One wrong step and you fall 300 feet. Elena's mouth went dry, but she nodded and dismounted. They entered the pass, and immediately the world closed in around them. The walls rose so high that only a sliver of darkening sky was visible overhead. Every sound echoed and multiplied. Every step felt precarious. They moved in silence, Elena focusing entirely on placing one foot in front of the other, trusting Talon's navigation in the near-total darkness. Hours blurred together. Her legs burned. Her hands were scraped raw from catching herself against the rock walls. But she kept moving. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the pass began to widen. Fresh air hit Elena's face, and she looked up to see stars spread across the sky in breathtaking profusion. They'd made it through. Talon led them a short distance from the pass and stopped in a small clearing sheltered by boulders. We rest here for 2 hours. Then we push on. Elena collapsed against a rock, every muscle trembling with exhaustion. Talon unsaddled the horses and gave them water, his movements efficient despite his obvious fatigue. Then he sat beside Elena and handed her dried meat and hard bread. They ate in silence, too tired for conversation. But as Elena's breathing steadied and her heartbeat slowed, questions began crowding her mind. "Why are you really doing this?" she asked quietly. "Not the answer you gave Morrison. The real reason." Talon chewed slowly, staring out at the darkness. "You remember what I told you about my sister?" "Yes." "I found her too late. By the time I tracked her path back from the fort, she was already dead, frozen, alone." His voice was flat, emotionless, but Elena heard the pain beneath. "I kept thinking, if I'd just been faster, if I'd known sooner, if I'd made different choices, maybe she'd still be alive." "You can't blame yourself for that." "Can I?" He looked at her. "I knew that soldier was lying to her. I could see it, but I didn't say anything because I thought she needed to make her own choices. I thought I was respecting her independence. Instead, I let her walk into a death sentence because I was too cowardly to interfere. That's not cowardice. That's trust. It's guilt." Talon's jaw tightened. "And every time I have a chance to stop something like that from happening to someone else, I take it. Not because I'm a hero, because I'm trying to atone for the one time I didn't." Elena absorbed this, understanding him better in that moment than she had in all their time together. "You can't save everyone." "I know, but I can try to save someone. And if I die trying, at least I die doing something that matters, instead of just surviving." "Your life matters, Talon. Not just what you do with it. You, as a person, matter." He looked at her like she'd spoken a foreign language. "No one's ever said that to me before." "Then people have been failing you your entire life." Elena shifted closer, her shoulder brushing his. "You matter to those children. You matter to this territory, whether they know it or not. You matter to me." The last words came out softer than she intended, more vulnerable. Talon held her gaze, something shifting in his expression. "Elena." A sound cut through the night, distant but distinct. Horses, moving fast. Talon was on his feet instantly, rifle in hand. Elena grabbed her own weapon and moved beside him. They pressed against the boulders, watching the path below. A group of riders emerged from the darkness, at least 15 men, heavily armed. Even in the starlight, Elena could see the hard set of their faces, the casual violence in how they handled their weapons. "Raiders," Talon breathed. "They must have sent a scouting party ahead." The riders passed within 50 yards of their position, close enough that Elena could hear their conversation. "Boss says we hit San Miguel before sunrise," one called out. "Get in, get the gold, get out. Anyone who fights, we put down hard." "What about the women and kids?" another asked. "What about them? Dead witnesses can't identify nobody." Laughter followed, cold and cruel. Elena's hands tightened on her rifle, rage and horror warring in her chest. Talon's hand on her arm kept her still until the riders disappeared around a bend. "They're going to kill everyone," Elena whispered. "Not if we get there first." Talon was already moving, gathering their supplies with urgent efficiency. "That scouting party will reach San Miguel in 3 hours. We need to beat them there, get the people organized. It's the only chance." They rode through the night at a punishing pace, the horses' labored breathing loud in the darkness. Elena's exhaustion was a distant thing now, burned away by adrenaline and desperate purpose. The landscape flew by in shadows and starlight. As false dawn began to lighten the eastern sky, they crested a ridge and saw San Miguel spread below them in the valley. It was larger than Elena expected, a proper town with a main street, several substantial buildings, scattered homes. Lantern light flickered in windows as early risers began their day, unaware of the death riding toward them. "We have maybe an hour," Talon said, "maybe less." They rode down into the town, their horses' hooves loud on the packed dirt of the main street. Doors opened. People emerged, staring at the strangers with suspicion and curiosity. A man stepped out of what looked like the town's general store, a shotgun cradled in his arms. "Who are you and what's your business here?" Elena dismounted, her legs shaky but her voice steady. "My name is Elena Ward. This is Talon Voss. We're here to warn you. There's a gang of raiders heading this way, at least 40 men, heavily armed. They plan to attack at sunrise and kill everyone who resists." The man's face went pale. "That's impossible. We haven't had trouble here in years." "You're about to." Talon's voice cut through the gathering murmurs. "They're after the mining payroll that's supposed to arrive this afternoon. They'll tear this town apart looking for it." "How do we know you're not the threat?" a woman called out. "How do we know this isn't some trick?" "Because if we wanted to hurt you, we'd have done it already, instead of warning you." Elena stepped forward. "We rode through the night to get here. We risked our lives to give you a chance. What you do with that chance is up to you." The man with the shotgun studied them, his eyes moving from Elena's exhausted face to Talon's weathered features to the foam-flecked horses that spoke of desperate travel. Then he turned to the growing crowd. "Get everyone to the church. Women, children, anyone who can't fight. Board up the windows and bar the doors. The rest of you, get your weapons. If these folks are telling the truth, we've got maybe an hour to prepare." The town exploded into controlled chaos. People ran to spread the word while others grabbed weapons and supplies. Elena helped herd frightened children toward the church, her voice calm even as her heart raced. Talon moved through the crowd with quiet authority, directing men to defensive positions, pointing out sight lines and cover. The man with the shotgun, who introduced himself as Thomas Garrett, the town's mayor, pulled them aside. "Even if we prepare, we're outnumbered 2-1. How do we possibly hold them off?" "You don't," Talon said bluntly. "Not in a straight fight. But raiders aren't soldiers. They're used to easy targets. If we make them pay for every inch, if we make it cost more than the gold's worth, they'll break. And if they don't?" Talon met his gaze steadily. "Then we make sure the women and children have time to escape out the back. There's a canyon trail behind the church. It leads to Fort Prescott. They can make it if they leave now." Garrett's face twisted with anguish. "You're asking me to abandon my home, Mike. I'm asking you to save lives." Talon's voice was gentle but firm. "Buildings can be rebuilt. People can't." Before Garrett could respond, a shout rang out from the edge of town. "Riders coming! At least 20 of them!" Elena's stomach dropped. The scouting party had arrived early. Talon grabbed her arm. "Get to the church. Make sure everyone's ready to evacuate if needed." "What are you going to do?" "Buy you time." He was already moving toward the main street, rifle in hand. Elena wanted to argue, to stay with him, but the sound of approaching horses galvanized her. She ran for the church, bursting through the doors to find it packed with terrified families. She found the pastor, a gray-haired man with kind eyes, and explained the evacuation route. "We're ready," he said quietly. "The moment shooting starts, we go." "No." Lucy's voice cut through the murmur of frightened voices. Elena spun to see Ben, Samuel, and Lucy standing by the altar. "You three were supposed to stay at the fort." "We stowed away in a supply wagon that was heading this way," Ben said defiantly. "We weren't going to let you face this alone." "You should have," Elena started, then stopped. Because what could she say? That they should have stayed safe while others fought? Wasn't that exactly what they'd refused to let her do? The first gunshot shattered the morning quiet, then another. Then a volley that sounded like the world tearing apart. The battle for San Miguel had begun. The gunfire was relentless, a cacophony that shook the church's wooden frame. Elena dropped to her knees beside the children, pulling them close as bullets punched through the thin walls above their heads. Around them, women clutched infants and whispered desperate reassurances that no one believed. "Everyone down!" the pastor shouted, moving along the pews to check that families were below the line of fire. "Stay low and stay quiet." Elena crawled to a window and risked a glance outside. What she saw made her blood run cold. The raiders hadn't just sent 20 men. The full force had arrived, pouring into town from multiple directions like a flood of violence. They moved with practiced efficiency, taking cover behind buildings, firing at anything that moved. The town's defenders were badly outnumbered and already falling back toward the church. She spotted Talon on the roof of the general store, his rifle picking off raiders with methodical precision. But for every man he dropped, 2 more appeared. Mayor Garrett was crouched behind a water trough, blood streaming from a wound on his shoulder. The blacksmith fired from his forge, then ducked as return fire shattered his windows. "We can't hold them," Elena breathed. "Then we evacuate." The pastor was already moving toward the back door. "Everyone up, we're leaving. Women and children first. Move quickly and quietly." But as he threw open the rear door, gunfire erupted from that direction too. A raider stood in the alley, grinning as he raised his rifle. The pastor slammed the door and threw the bolt just as bullets splintered the wood. "They've surrounded us," someone cried. We're trapped." Panic rippled through the crowded church. Children began to sob. Women held them tighter, their own faces pale with terror. Elena's mind raced, searching for options, finding none. Ben tugged at her sleeve. "The bell tower. We can see the whole town from there. Maybe find a way out." It was desperate, but desperation was all they had. Elena grabbed the rifle and motioned for the children to follow. They scrambled up the narrow ladder to the tower, emerging into a small platform beneath the bronze bell. From here, San Miguel spread below them like a map drawn in smoke and chaos. The raiders controlled the main street and were systematically working their way through the buildings, smashing doors, dragging out anyone they found. Bodies lay in the dirt, both raiders and defenders. The town was losing, and losing badly. Then Elena saw something that stopped her breath. On the eastern edge of town, a group of raiders was setting fire to the schoolhouse. Flames caught immediately, leaping from roof to roof. They were going to burn the town to force everyone out. "We have to do something," Samuel said, his voice shaking but determined. Elena looked at the rifle in her hands, then at the 3 children watching her with eyes that had seen too much death already. What could 1 woman and 3 kids possibly do against 40 armed men? The answer came from an unexpected direction. A war cry split the air, and Elena's head whipped around to see riders cresting the hills north of town. Not the Apache warriors from before, but something just as surprising. Fort Prescott cavalry, at least 30 soldiers with Captain Morrison at their head. They'd come after all. But they were still too far away, and the raiders had seen them too. The gang's leader, a bull of a man with a scarred face, was already shouting orders to his men. Half turned to face the approaching cavalry, while the other half pressed their attack on the church with renewed fury. The front doors of the church exploded inward under a battering ram. Women screamed. The pastor tried to hold the raiders back with a shotgun, but he was overwhelmed in seconds. Men poured into the church, weapons raised, faces twisted with greed and violence. Elena raised her rifle and fired. The shot went wide, but it drew the raiders' attention upward to the bell tower. 3 of them started climbing the ladder. "Get behind me," Elena ordered the children, chambering another round. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold the rifle steady. The first raider's head appeared through the trap door. Elena fired. This time she didn't miss. The man fell backward, taking the 2 behind him down in a tangle of limbs. But there would be more. There were always more. She heard Ben behind her, his voice urgent. "Miss Elena, the bell rope!" Elena glanced at the thick rope hanging beside them, connected to the massive bronze bell overhead. "What about it? If we ring it loud enough, it might—" He didn't finish, but Elena understood. She grabbed the rope and pulled with all her strength. The bell tolled, deep and resonant, cutting through even the gunfire. She pulled again and again, the sound echoing across the valley. Outside, the cavalry heard it and redoubled their charge. Inside the church, the raiders looked up in confusion, giving the defenders precious seconds to regroup. And somewhere in the chaos, Talon heard it too. Elena saw him leap from the general store roof to the church's peaked roof, his movements impossibly agile. He fired down into the raiders below, then dropped through a hole in the ceiling directly into the church's interior. She lost sight of him in the melee. Another raider appeared at the trap door, this one faster, more determined. He grabbed Elena's ankle and pulled. She fell hard, the rifle clattering away. The man hauled himself up, a knife gleaming in his hand. "Thought you could ring for help." He grinned, showing broken teeth. "Help ain't coming fast enough, lady." Ben threw himself at the raider, small fist swinging. The man backhanded him casually, sending the boy sprawling. Lucy screamed. Samuel grabbed the fallen rifle, but he was too small to lift it properly. Elena's hand closed around the bell rope again, not to ring it this time, to use it differently. As the raider lunged at her with the knife, She wrapped the rope around his wrist and pulled, using his own momentum against him. He stumbled, off balance, and his foot caught on the edge of the trap door. For one frozen moment, he teetered there, arms windmilling. Then gravity took over, and he fell through the opening with a scream that ended abruptly. Elena collapsed against the bell tower wall, gasping for breath. The children rushed to her, and she held them close, all of them trembling. "Look!" Samuel pointed toward the main street. The cavalry had reached the town, and the tide was turning. Morrison's soldiers fought with disciplined precision, pushing the raiders back. But the gang's leader wasn't retreating. He'd gathered a core group of his most vicious men and was making a last stand in front of the burning schoolhouse, using hostages as shields. Townspeople dragged from their homes, including Mayor Garrett. Elena scrambled down the ladder, the children following. The church's interior was a disaster. Overturned pews, shattered windows, wounded people being tended by those still able to help. But the immediate threat had passed. The raiders inside were either dead, wounded, or fleeing. She found the pastor binding a woman's arm with strips of cloth torn from his own shirt. "Where's Talon?" "He went after the leader." The pastor nodded toward the street. "Alone." Elena's heart lurched. She grabbed the rifle and ran outside into smoke and chaos. The cavalry had pushed most of the raiders to the edge of town, but the standoff at the schoolhouse held everyone at bay. The gang leader had his knife pressed to Mayor Garrett's throat while his men aimed rifles at the other hostages. "Back off or they die," the leader roared. "I want horses and safe passage out of here or I start cutting throats." Morrison reined his horse to a halt, his soldiers spreading out but keeping their weapons trained on the raiders. "Let the hostages go and we'll consider terms." "I don't negotiate with soldiers." The leader pressed the knife harder, drawing blood. Garrett gasped but didn't cry out. "You've got to the count of 10. 1, don't." The single word spoken quietly cut through everything. Every head turned toward the burning schoolhouse, where Talon Voss stepped out of the smoke like something conjured from the flames themselves. His rifle was slung across his back, his hands empty and visible, but there was something in his posture that made even hardened raiders take a step back. "Talon Voss?" The gang leader's eyes narrowed. "The great Apache hunter. I was wondering if you'd show." "Let them go, Kane." Talon moved closer with slow, deliberate steps. "This is over. Your men are scattered. The cavalry is here. The only question now is how many more people die before you accept it." So the leader had a name. Kane studied Talon with the calculating gaze of a predator recognizing another predator. "You're not carrying. That means you want to talk." "I want to offer you a choice." Talon stopped about 20 feet away. "You let those people go, and I let you walk away from here alive." Kane laughed, a harsh bark of sound. "One man telling me what he'll let me do? You got nerve, I'll give you that." "I've got facts." Talon's voice remained calm. "You've already lost. The gold isn't here. It was rerouted to Fort Prescott 2 days ago. The town knows you're coming. The cavalry knows you're here. Every lawman in the territory will be hunting you within the week. Your only chance is to run now while you still can." "And you'll just let me go?" Kane's tone was mocking, but Elena saw uncertainty flicker in his eyes. "I'll let you face justice in a courtroom instead of dying in the dirt like a dog." Talon glanced at the hostages. "Those people you're holding? They have families, children, the same as the families you've already destroyed. Killing them won't get you the gold, won't get you freedom, won't get you anything except a quicker path to a rope." "Sounds to me like I'm dead either way." "The difference is whether you die with innocent blood on your hands or whether you finally make one choice that doesn't make the world worse." Talon took another step forward. "I've made plenty of bad choices, Kane. Killed men who needed killing and some who probably didn't. I carry that weight every day. But you still have a chance to choose differently, to be remembered as something other than the man who massacred a town for gold that was never there." The silence stretched taut as a bowstring. Kane's knife trembled slightly against Garrett's throat. His men shifted nervously, looking to their leader for direction. "Why should I trust you?" Kane finally asked. "Because, unlike everyone else here, I'm not promising you mercy. I'm promising you the truth. Let those people go, throw down your weapons, and you'll live to stand trial. Keep going, and you'll die in the next 5 minutes. Those are your options. Choose." Elena held her breath. Everyone did. The entire town seemed frozen in that moment, waiting to see if words could succeed where violence had only brought more violence. Kane's eyes moved from Talon to the cavalry to his own dwindling forces. She could see him doing the math, calculating odds that grew worse by the second. Then, slowly, he lowered the knife. "Stand down!" he growled to his men. "Throw down your weapons. Boss, you can't— I said stand down!" Kane shoved Garrett toward the cavalry and dropped his knife. His men, seeing their leader surrender, began dropping their own weapons with sullen reluctance. Morrison's soldiers moved in immediately, binding the raiders with swift efficiency. The hostages were freed, rushing to embrace relieved families. The town, still smoldering and damaged, began to breathe again. Elena ran to Talon, who stood apart from the celebration, watching with his usual quiet intensity. "You did it. You got him to surrender without more bloodshed." "For now." Talon's jaw was tight. "But men like Kane don't change. He'll try to escape. He'll lie in court. He'll find ways to hurt people even from behind bars." "Maybe. But today you gave him a choice. What he does with it is on him, not you." Before Talon could respond, Captain Morrison approached, his uniform dusty and bloodstained, but his bearing still military straight. "Mr. Voss, Miss Ward, I owe you both an apology and my thanks. If you hadn't gotten here first, if you hadn't warned these people, this would have been a massacre." "The cavalry arriving made the difference," Talon said. "The cavalry arrived because you made us believe the threat was real." Morrison extended his hand. "Whatever history you have, whatever rumors follow you, today you were a hero. I'll make sure that's in my official report." Talon looked at the offered hand for a long moment before accepting it. "Just tell the truth. That's all I ask." "You have my word." As Morrison moved away to organize his men, Elena felt a tug on her coat. She looked down to find Lucy, tears streaming down her soot-stained face. "Miss Elena, Mayor Garrett is asking for you. He's hurt bad." They found Garrett lying on the church steps, the town's physician working desperately to staunch the bleeding from his shoulder, and a deeper wound in his side that Elena hadn't noticed before. The mayor's face was pale, his breathing shallow. "Miss Ward," his voice was barely a whisper. "The children. Make sure the children are safe." "They're safe. You saved them by surrendering when you did." "Not our children." Garrett's hand gripped hers with surprising strength. "All the children. This town. This territory. They deserve better than what we've given them. Better than fear and hatred and endless fighting." "They'll have it," Elena promised, though she had no idea how to make that true. "I heard what you said. At the fort. About making sure the truth gets told." Garrett's eyes found Talon, who stood a respectful distance away. "Tell them. Tell them the monster saved us. Tell them we were wrong." "I will." Garrett closed his eyes, his grip loosening. The physician worked on, but Elena could see in his face that it was a losing battle. Mayor Thomas Garrett died as the sun reached its zenith, with his town still standing and his people still breathing because two strangers had ridden through the night to give them a fighting chance. The aftermath stretched into days. The cavalry helped rebuild what the fire had destroyed, though scars remained. The captured raiders were transported to Fort Prescott to await trial. The dead, both defenders and attackers, were buried with whatever dignity the desert allowed. Elena found herself organizing relief efforts, her teaching background making her a natural coordinator. She cataloged damage, distributed supplies, helped families find temporary shelter. The children stayed close, refusing to leave her side, and she found she didn't want them to. On the third day after the battle, Morrison called Elena and Talon to a meeting in the rebuilt mayor's office. Margaret Hayes was there too, looking healthier than Elena had seen her since the day they'd met, though grief still shadowed her eyes. "I've been writing my reports," Morrison began without preamble. "Official accounts of everything that happened at Fort Prescott and here in San Miguel. I wanted you all to hear them before they go to Territorial Command." He read aloud, and Elena felt tears prick her eyes as she heard the truth laid out in clear, unflinching language. Morrison detailed how Elena had been wrongly accused and condemned, how Talon had intervened and saved not just her but 3 children, how they'd warned the fort of the raider attack, how Talon had negotiated a peaceful withdrawal with Apache warriors who could have destroyed them all. He described the desperate ride to San Miguel, the battle, the final confrontation where Talon's words had prevented further bloodshed. "This is all going in the official record?" Elena asked when he finished. "Every word, along with a commendation for Mr. Voss and a recommendation that all charges against you from Copper Ridge be dismissed as fraudulent." Morrison looked at Talon. "I'm also recommending you for a position as a civilian scout and mediator. The territory needs someone who can talk to both sides, who has credibility with the Apache and the settlers. Someone who wants peace more than victory." Talon was quiet for a long moment. "I work alone." "You did work alone," Morrison corrected. "But what you've accomplished in the past week required working with others, with Miss Ward, with this fort, with townspeople who had every reason to fear you but chose to trust you instead." He leaned forward. "I'm not ordering you to take the position. I'm offering you a chance to build the bridge you talked about, to make sure children grow up learning something other than hate. And if I refuse, then you ride away and nothing changes. The cycle continues. Fear breeds violence, breeds more fear." Morrison's expression was grave. "But I don't think that's what you want. Not anymore." Talon looked at Elena, and she saw the question in his eyes. "What do you think?" She thought about chains and burning buildings and children who'd learned to be brave when the adults around them had chosen cowardice. She thought about a man who'd been called a monster so many times he'd almost believed it himself, until circumstance forced him to remember he was human. "I think," she said carefully, "that maybe it's time we both stopped running from who we could be and started building what should be." The corner of Talon's mouth lifted in something that wasn't quite a smile but was close enough. He looked back at Morrison. "I'll need conditions. I work my own way, on my own schedule. I won't wear a uniform or take orders that contradict my judgment. And I want immunity for people I negotiate with. No cavalry swooping in to arrest everyone the moment I broker a peace." "I can't promise that." "Then we have no deal." Morrison sighed. "I can promise to take your recommendation seriously and give you advance warning before any military action. That's the best I can offer." "It's not enough." "Talon." Elena touched his arm. "It's a start. A real start. Take it." He studied her face, then Morrison's, then looked out the window at San Miguel rebuilding itself from ashes. Finally, he nodded. 6 months. Trial basis. If it doesn't work, I walk away." "Agreed." Morrison extended his hand again, and this time Talon shook it without hesitation. After Morrison left to finalize his reports, Elena and Talon stood together in the office, the weight of what they'd committed to settling over them like dust after a storm. "What will you do now?" Talon asked. "Morrison can probably get the territory to fund a teaching position here if you want it." Elena had been thinking about that. She looked out at the town, at the children playing in the street, despite everything they'd survived, at the resilience of people who refused to let violence define them. "I want to build a school," she said, "not just for San Miguel, but for the whole territory. A place where settler children and Apache children can learn together, where they can see each other as people before anyone teaches them to see enemies." "That's ambitious. So is peace." She met his eyes. "But I can't do it alone. I need someone who knows both worlds, who can help me navigate the politics and the prejudice and all the people who will think we're fools for trying." "Are you asking me to be a school teacher?" There was amusement in his voice now, real and unguarded. "I'm asking you to be a partner. In this. In building something that matters." Talon was quiet, his expression unreadable. Then he said, "I'm not good with children." "That's a lie. Ben, Samuel, and Lucy adore you." I can't read or write very well. My father taught me some, but then I'll teach you. That's what teachers do." "Elena." He caught her hand, his calloused fingers gentle. "Why? Why keep choosing to tie yourself to me? You're free now. Morrison's cleared your name. You could go anywhere, do anything. Why stay?" It was the same question she'd asked herself a dozen times since leaving Copper Ridge. The answer had been forming slowly, piece by piece, through every choice they'd made together. "Because I was drowning in chains and you taught me to swim," she said simply. "Because you saw me as a person when everyone else saw me as a problem. Because every time you had a choice between the easy path and the right one, you chose right." She squeezed his hand. "And because when I imagine the future I want to build, you're in it. Not because I need you to save me, but because I want to save something together. Talon's defenses, so carefully maintained for so long, finally crumbled. He pulled her close, his arms wrapping around her with a fierceness that spoke of years of loneliness finally breaking. Elena held him just as tightly, feeling the steady beat of his heart against hers. "I don't know how to do this," he murmured against her hair. "How to be part of something, how to trust that it won't be ripped away. Neither do I. We'll figure it out together." They stood like that for a long moment, two people who'd been thrown away by the world they were now trying to save, finding in each other the strength to try. A throat cleared behind them. They separated to find Ben, Samuel, and Lucy standing in the doorway, trying and failing to hide grins. "Mrs. Morrison says supper's ready," Ben announced. "She made extra because she said you two probably forgot to eat. Again." "She's not wrong," Elena admitted. As they walked together toward the mess hall, Lucy slipped her small hand into Talon's much larger one. He looked down at her, startled, and she beamed up at him. "When you build the school, can we help?" she asked. "You want to help build a school?" "We want to help build everything," Samuel said. "We want to make sure what happened to us doesn't happen to other kids." "We want to matter," Ben added quietly. "The way you showed us we could." Talon stopped walking. He knelt down to the children's level, his expression serious. "You already matter, not because of what you can do or build or help with. You matter because you're here, because you survived, because you chose hope when you had every reason to choose hate. Don't ever forget that." Ben nodded, blinking back tears. Samuel hugged Talon impulsively, and Lucy joined in. And then Elena was there too, all of them tangled together in the dusty street of a half-destroyed town that was already beginning to heal. The months that followed were hard, harder than Elena had imagined. Convincing the territorial governor to fund a school that welcomed Apache children alongside settler children required every ounce of determination she possessed. She wrote letters, gave speeches, called in favors from Morrison and other officers who'd witnessed what she and Talon had accomplished. Talon, meanwhile, began the delicate work of mediation. He rode between Apache camps and settler towns carrying messages, negotiating disputes, slowly building trust where none had existed before. Some doors remained closed to him. Some people refused to see him as anything but the monster of legend. But others began to listen, to recognize that the alternative to peace was only more death. Margaret Hayes became their unexpected ally. She'd lost her husband to the raiders, lost her home and her sense of safety. But instead of letting grief turn to bitterness, she channeled it into action. She spoke at town meetings, wrote to newspapers, told her story to anyone who would listen. She made people understand that the real enemy wasn't Apache or settler, but the men who profited from keeping them at war. Ben, Samuel, and Lucy were adopted by a family in San Miguel, a childless couple who'd lost their own children to illness years before. But the three siblings spent most of their time with Elena and Talon, helping however they could. Ben proved to have a gift for numbers and kept careful accounts of their fundraising. Samuel had a gentle way with frightened children that made him invaluable when they finally opened the school. Lucy appointed herself Talon's shadow, following him everywhere and slowly teaching him to read by making him practice with her storybooks. The school itself rose on neutral ground between San Miguel and the nearest Apache settlement. It was a simple building, one large room with windows on all sides so everyone could see there was nothing to fear. Elena taught reading, writing, arithmetic, and history that didn't paint either culture as villains. Talon taught survival skills, tracking, how to read the land and weather. Together, they taught their students that different didn't mean dangerous, that understanding was stronger than fear. The first day of school, only 5 children came, 3 settler kids and 2 Apache. By the end of the first month, they had 20. By the end of 6 months, they had to add another room. Not everyone approved. Clayton Frost, the man who'd framed Elena, tried to stir up trouble from Copper Ridge. But when he rode to the territorial capital to make his case, he found Morrison's official reports waiting for him, along with testimony from Margaret Hayes and the children he'd tried to make orphans. The charges against Elena were formally dismissed, and Frost himself faced questions about his own conduct that sent him fleeing to California. The raiders who'd survived the battle at San Miguel stood trial. Kane, the leader, tried to escape twice and failed both times. He was hanged on a cold November morning, still claiming he'd been betrayed by Talon Voss. No one believed him. The evidence was too clear, the witnesses too numerous. As winter turned to spring, Elena stood at the window of the school, watching her students play together in the yard. Apache children taught settler children games in their language. Settler children shared sweets their mothers had sent. Ben refereed disputes with the fairness of a natural judge. Lucy led singing lessons that mixed hymns and tribal chants into something entirely new. Talon came up behind her, his hand finding hers automatically now. Thinking deep thoughts? Thinking about how far we've come, she said. A year ago, I was in chains. You were alone. Those children were orphans. And now look at us. It's not perfect. No, but it's better. She turned to face him. You saved my life, Talon. But more than that, you gave me a purpose. You showed me that one person choosing to do right can change everything. You did the same for me. He brushed a strand of hair from her face. I spent years believing I was exactly what people said I was. Dangerous, untrustworthy. Better off alone. You made me believe I could be something else. You always were something else. You just needed someone to see it. He kissed her then, soft and sure, and Elena felt the last pieces of her old life, the fear, the shame, the sense of being unwanted, finally fall away. She was home. Not in a place, but in a purpose, in a partnership, in the revolutionary act of choosing love over fear. That evening, Morrison arrived with news. The territorial governor is coming next month. He wants to see the school, meet the students. If he's impressed, he'll recommend federal funding to expand the program across the territory. Elena's heart leaped. That would mean we could build schools in every settlement, reach hundreds of children. Thousands, eventually. Morrison smiled. You two have started something that's bigger than either of you now. The question is whether you're ready for it to grow. Elena looked at Talon, saw her own mixture of hope and trepidation reflected in his eyes. They'd come so far, but there was still so far to go. More resistance to face, more minds to change, more children who needed to learn that the world could be different than the one their parents had known. We're ready, they said together. The governor's visit was everything they'd hoped for and feared. He was a stern man, suspicious of anything that challenged the established order. But when he saw Apache and settler children working together on mathematics problems, when he heard them singing in harmony, when Ben explained the school's philosophy with the earnest conviction of someone who'd lived through the alternative, something in the governor's expression softened. This is remarkable, he said to Elena. In all my years in territorial administration, I've never seen anything like this. That's because no one's tried, Elena replied. Everyone assumes the divide is too wide, the wounds too deep. But children don't carry those wounds yet. They can learn a different way if we give them the chance. The governor walked the perimeter of the school, Talon following silently. Finally, he stopped and turned to face them both. I'll fund 5 more schools, 1 in each quadrant of the territory, and 1 here as the central training facility for teachers. You'll teach others your methods, and they'll spread this work across every settlement and reservation. Elena felt tears spring to her eyes. 5 more schools, dozens of teachers, hundreds of children. The impossible dream they'd started with was becoming real. There's one condition, the governor added. I want your story told, the real story, all of it. How a disgraced schoolteacher and a feared outlaw came together to save lives and build something better than war. People need to know that change is possible, that redemption is real. Will you allow that? Talon tensed beside her, and Elena understood why. Going public meant inviting scrutiny, judgment, attacks from those who preferred the old hatreds to the new hope. It meant putting their pasts on display for everyone to dissect. But it also meant the truth would be known. That the monster wasn't the man who saved children, but the systems that made monsters necessary. That civilization wasn't found in fancy buildings and proper manners, but in choosing compassion over convenience. We'll allow it, Elena said. Tell the story, all of it. The story spread across the territory like wildfire, carried by newspapers and word of mouth. Some people rejected it as propaganda. Others found in it a permission to hope they desperately needed. Parents brought their children to the schools. Young teachers volunteered to learn Elena's methods. Apache leaders who'd been hostile began cautiously reaching out, willing to consider that maybe, possibly, there was another way. 2 years after Elena Ward first stood in chains in Copper Ridge, She stood at the dedication ceremony for the 10th Territorial School built on their model. A crowd of hundreds had gathered, settlers and Apache, soldiers and civilians, children and elders. Captain Morrison gave a speech about courage and vision. Margaret Hayes spoke about turning grief into action. The children from that first class sang a song they'd written themselves, about bridges and belonging. And when it was Elena's turn to speak, she stood with Talon beside her and told the truth. "I was thrown away," she said simply. "Condemned for a crime I didn't commit, chained and offered as a sacrifice to save people who should have protected me. I should have died alone in the desert, another forgotten casualty of a territory at war with itself. But I didn't die because one man chose mercy over cruelty, truth over convenience, possibility over fear." She looked at Talon, saw the emotion in his eyes that he no longer tried to hide. That man was called a monster, a savage, a threat. But he was the most civilized person I'd ever met, because he understood that civilization isn't about what you are or where you come from. It's about what you choose to do when you have power over someone else's life. Do you abuse that power, or do you use it to lift them up? Do you perpetuate the cycle of violence, or do you risk everything to break it? The crowd was silent, hanging on every word. "We're not here because we're heroes," Elena continued. "We're here because we're survivors who decided surviving wasn't enough. We wanted to build something worth surviving for. These schools, these children learning to see each other as friends instead of enemies, this is what we're building. This is how we break the cycle, not through more violence, not through more fear, but through the radical act of teaching children that they have a choice, that they can be better than what hatred tells them they must be." She paused, gathering her courage for what came next. "When I first met Talon Voss, I was afraid of him. The whole frontier was afraid of him. But fear and truth are not the same thing. The truth is that this man saved my life and the lives of countless others. The truth is that he risked everything to protect children who weren't his, to warn people who wanted him dead, to stand between innocent lives and the violence that threatened them. The truth is that he's given his life to building peace in a place where everyone said peace was impossible." She reached for Talon's hand, and he took it without hesitation. "So when you see these schools, when you see these children learning and growing and choosing friendship over fear, remember who made it possible. Remember that the monster the frontier feared was actually the man the frontier needed. And remember that each of us has that same choice every single day, to be what fear tells us we must be, or to be what hope knows we can become." The applause started slowly, then built to a roar. People stood, wiping tears, reaching for each other. And in that moment, Elena saw the future they'd been building finally solidify into something real and lasting. That night, after the ceremonies ended and the crowds dispersed, Elena and Talon sat together on the school's steps, watching the sun set over the desert that had once seemed so hostile and now felt like home. "Do you ever regret it?" Talon asked quietly. "The life you gave up? The safety you could have had if you just stayed at the fort?" Elena considered the question. She thought about the woman she'd been in Copper Ridge, careful, cautious, always trying to please people who would never be pleased. She thought about the teacher who'd believed books and proper grammar could civilize the frontier, who'd had no idea how much she had to learn about what civilization actually meant. "I don't regret a single choice I made after you broke those chains," she said finally. "Every hard day, every impossible challenge, every moment of fear, they all led here, to something bigger than I ever could have imagined, to children who will grow up knowing that peace is possible, to a life that matters in ways I didn't know life could matter." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "What about you? Do you regret stopping in Copper Ridge that day, taking on the burden of a condemned woman and 3 orphaned children?" Talon was quiet for a long moment, his arm coming around her shoulders. "I spent most of my life alone because it was safer, easier, less painful than watching people I cared about suffer or die. But these past 2 years with you, building this, creating something that will outlive us both, I've never felt more alive, more human, more like the person I was supposed to be before the world taught me I had to be something else." He turned to look at her, his eyes holding hers with an intensity that still made her breath catch. "You asked me once why I helped you. The real reason. It's because when I saw you in those chains, I didn't just see my sister, I saw myself. Every version of myself that had been judged, condemned, thrown away for not fitting into the boxes people tried to force me into. And I thought, if I could save you, maybe I could prove that all those judgments were wrong. That being different doesn't make you dangerous. That being cast out doesn't mean you're worthless. You proved that, Elena said softly. To everyone, but especially to yourself. We proved it, together. He pressed a kiss to her forehead. Everything we've built, we built it together. I couldn't have done it alone, and I wouldn't have wanted to. They sat in comfortable silence as stars began to emerge in the darkening sky. Around them, the school stood solid and sure, a monument to the revolutionary idea that children could learn to be better than their parents' fears. Inside, books waited on shelves, maps hung on walls, and desks sat ready for students who would never have to choose between their heritage and their education. This was their legacy. Not perfection, not paradise, but possibility. A crack in the wall of hatred wide enough for hope to grow through. A generation of children who would learn to see each other as people before anyone could teach them to see enemies. A future built on the radical premise that redemption was real and peace was worth fighting for. Elena Ward had started as a school teacher in chains, condemned by the very people she'd tried to serve. Talon Voss had started as an outcast, feared and hated by both the cultures that claimed him. Together, they'd become something neither could have achieved alone. Builders of bridges, teachers of peace, proof that the most unlikely people can change the world when they choose to see it not as it is, but as it could be. And as the desert night settled over the school and its sleeping students, two former outcasts sat together under the stars, holding hands and planning tomorrow's lessons, living proof that sometimes the greatest love stories aren't about being saved, but about saving something together. The frontier would never be the same, and that was exactly the point.